Helen Zille is running for Joburg Mayor. Some love her, some loathe her. Could this gamble turn the DA into the biggest party in the City of Gold and change local politics forever? Or create a backlash that tarnishes Zille's legacy? Let's find out. Spread the fire. Welcome back to the Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh experience, or SMWX. Like, share, subscribe. Help us get to 400,000 subscribers. My. South African politics just keeps getting hotter. Someone said South Africa is not a movie, it's a thriller. And that's for sure. Helen Zille announced this weekend that she's running for Joburg Mayor. And I want to explore why I believe that this could be a significant shift in South African politics, and why, whether you like Helen Zille or you don't, her candidacy presents a serious challenge to the ANC in the most important metro in the country. Before we get into it, let's take a look at how Zille came out in this clip to follow, announcing her candidacy for Joburg officially.
Joburg is South Africa's most devastating example of what bad government can do to great people. You feel it with every pothole on Louis Botha Avenue or on the Golden Highway, arteries of our city that have been left to crumble. You smell it when you walk down Pritchard Street in the CBD, and others littered with rubbish and choked by illegal dumping. You see it when you open your tap in Coronationville, or right here in Soweto and no water comes out, or when you sit in darkness during endless power cuts in Roodepoort, Randburg and Eldorado Park.
Zille sprinting out of the starting blocks, and I want to clarify something, because when I say that Helen Zille is a formidable candidate and that the ANC should be very worried, that doesn't mean that I like Helen Zille or that I'm a DA supporter. I've been a supporter apparently of so many different political parties. But political analysis is not about how you feel, even whether you like a particular candidate. It's about a cold-eyed look at the data on the ground. And so today I want to explore exactly why I believe that Helen Zille's candidacy is a serious candidacy, one that could result in the DA actually being the biggest party in Joburg in the best case scenario for the DA. What I want to do is ground this view in data. So first I want to just tell you where are things standing in Joburg, what do recent polls say, and what are the by-elections saying? And what you'll see is that there's a very clear trend towards the DA in South Africa's urban areas, in Joburg in particular. And in fact, the DA isn't far off the ANC already. Having done that, I also want to talk about the governance crisis in Johannesburg and how the ANC has shot itself in the foot, leaving people without water, leaving roads with gaping craters, no longer even potholes, an electricity crisis, a food crisis built upon a governance crisis, and why the ANC's failures have opened the door for a possible Helen Zille mayorship, or at least a successful DA election, because the coalition dynamics will determine who the mayor is. And then also just to talk about some of the shortcomings in Helen Zille and her candidacy in Joburg. There are shortcomings, there are problems with Helen Zille, but why I believe the governance crisis in Joburg is going to outweigh those shortcomings in the minds of key swing voters who can help the DA get over the line to potentially becoming the biggest party in Joburg. So, why do I believe that this Zille candidacy is not something to dismiss? Let's take a look at a graphic which shows us where the DA was in the last local government election in 2021. So we've got a chart up here. The yellow line is the ANC, the blue line is the DA. On the x-axis, we've got the years, so 2000, 2006, these are different election years. And then on the y-axis, we've got the percentage of the vote. So you can see back in the early 2000s, the ANC was up at 60% in Joburg and the DA was down much lower than that at about half the vote share. But if you fast forward to 2016 already, that was a real breakout year for the DA. It was when there was huge criticism over the ANC in the Zuma years. Mmusi Maimane was leading the DA, and they had a massive election in which they came very close to beating the ANC already in 2016. So the DA was up in the high 30s, ANC in the low 40s. So they were already kind of neck and neck there. But then take a look at 2021. Interestingly, both of them declined. And this in large part was due to the fact that people were still quite disappointed with ANC governance, but also that Action SA had emerged onto the scene to compromise the DA's share of the vote as well. So the DA went back down to mid to high 20s, and the ANC was in the mid 30s, around 34. So the DA is at about 27, the ANC is at about 34 already. So I think people forget that the DA is breathing down the ANC's political neck and has been since 2016. And so it's not outlandish to imagine that the 6-point gap could be made back. But let's think about the 2024 election. What happened there? What happened there was that the DA held, so it didn't really grow and it didn't fall by much, at around the 20% mark nationally, but the ANC's decline continued. So we can expect, if that trend is anything to go by, it's not a perfect analogy, but if that electoral trend that we saw 2 years ago holds in Joburg, even if the DA stuck where it was, we would still have to contend with a significant ANC decline. Now, why are there reasons for a further ANC decline? I'll get to that later, but it's to do with the governance crisis in Joburg. People are very angry with the state of governance in Joburg. So that's just the background to where we are. The ANC and DA are already very close, and that needs to be borne in mind. But I want you to take a look at this poll released by the Social Research Foundation, or consider this poll. I'm not going to bring it up, but I'm just going to tell you what the figures were. In June 2025, there was a poll done by the SRF. Why should you care about polls? Because I was able to successfully predict in 2024 that the ANC would fall below 50% when everyone was saying they wouldn't, because I was looking at the data. It's not me. It's just the polling in South Africa is accurate. Of course, there's a margin for error, but it will tell you where to look within 5% or so. Any results outside of that are very unlikely. So take a look just nationally at where things stand. The ANC, as I mentioned before, has declined in the eyes of voters in a number of polls, but is teetering around the same late 30s, 40% mark. The DA has grown in the polls since the election. So the DA is profiting off the GNU, while the ANC is either falling or stagnating. And the DA is polling up above 25 now, nationally. Now you might think, oh, this poll must be biased towards the DA. Okay, then why has it got MK also up? MK, which is fascinating, was polling at 18% in this poll in June 2025, up from a previous poll in Feb 25 of around 12. So all I'm saying is, if we look at the electoral trends and we factor in the most recent polls nationally, we get a picture of the ANC potentially stagnating or falling, the DA rising. Add on top of that by-elections in Gauteng specifically. It's fair to say, and I would point you to excellent by-election analysts like Wayne Sussman, that the ANC's support in Gauteng is collapsing in by-elections. In by-election after by-election, recent by-election after recent by-election, the ANC is doing very, very badly. So that's in the place that this election is going to be held. So I'm not basing this opinion on whether I like Zille or whether I don't like Zille. I'm basing this opinion on a very close look at electoral trends, polls, and by-elections. And when you triangulate, in other words, when you get those 3 data points and they're all pointing in one direction, you need to take this DA candidacy very seriously. Add on top of that a fourth point, which is that there was a leaked internal DA poll, which had the ANC at around the 20% mark. Now, again, you might say, well, it was a DA poll. Internal DA polls can give us a direction. Sometimes they overstate the DA, but they can also be quite accurate on the ANC. Now, I think this poll had the DA up around the high 30s, which may be an overstatement. But Zille doesn't need much more than 30% to be the biggest party in Gauteng, right? If the ANC falls just below 30, let's say they lose 4 percentage points, which is very feasible, and if the DA gains 4 percentage points, then they'll be up above 30 and the ANC will be below 30. So we're entering an era in Joburg politics where you don't need to get 50% to be the biggest party. You just need about 30, maybe even high 20s, depending on how much the other smaller parties can shave away from the big two. So whether you are the biggest Helen Zille fan in the world and you've always supported her, or whether you recoil at the idea of Helen Zille running for Joburg Mayor, you cannot underestimate purely the possibility that she could take the DA to being the biggest party in Joburg. And again, I want to reiterate, I'm not saying I want this to happen. I'm not celebrating, but I'm giving the truth. And I might add, just to remind you about 2024, there were a lot of people angry at me with my predictions on 24. I remember saying the Northern Cape is going to go below 50 for the ANC. The ANC is going to go below 50 for the national election. It was obvious that the ANC, was going to fall below 50 in so many key provinces, spotting that the MK was on the electoral rise. I was told I was crazy, etc., but I have a very simple way of I go to the data. And when the data points in one direction, even if it sounds crazy, you've got to trust it. But that's just the direction in which the data is pointing. We need to also layer our analysis with a sense of what are the fundamentals, because elections are really about the fundamentals of governance in a particular place. Is that place a better place to live 5 years on from the last election? And we can categorically state that Joburg is not in a better condition today than it was in 2021. The governance crisis in Joburg will really make your eyes water. People walking through refuse-laden streets. The Joburg CBD in a state of absolute destruction and decay. Crime out of control. You just don't know whether you're going to get water this week. In terms of communication, it's like you don't even know whether there's someone on the other end listening to your complaints. I say this as a resident of Joburg, someone who's lived here most of my life. The condition of Joburg roads, the lack of street lights. I could go on, but here's the basic message. A person living in Joburg who has all these hopes and dreams, these economic desires, these desires for a better life, has seen a significant deterioration in their living conditions over the last 5 years, but they felt it worsen considerably in the last few years when the ANC retook the mayorship and in the coalition they had before where there was a minority candidate for mayor, but the ANC was still a key player. So the absolute biggest asset in the Helen Zille campaign is not necessarily Helen Zille, who's a capable politician. It is the crisis of service delivery in Joburg. And that is a gift that the ANC has handed over to the DA on a silver platter. And don't take it from me, because just a few months ago, we have short memories. Cyril Ramaphosa, who, by the way, lives in Joburg, remember, came and said he was very disappointed to see the condition of the city before some G20 meeting. It was very embarrassing to see all these services not being delivered. And then there was a big move and he went to the Joburg Council and spoke to all kinds of different players because everyone agreed, including the ANC, that Joburg was in a crisis. It's always been in a crisis, But this time the crisis had lurched to unimaginable and despicable proportions. So there is a crisis in Joburg, and Helen Zille spots the crisis, realizes there's an opportunity. And of course, she comes in with more experience than any of the candidates in terms of leading a city. Again, you might like how she led a city before, you might not like it. That's not my point for the purposes of this video. But she brings a host of experience. She's a national level political figure, whereas all the other parties up to now are fielding local government candidates. Dada Morero is not the kind of senior ANC leader that Helen Zille is within the DA. Now, of course, Herman Mashaba may put his hand up to run for Joburg Mayor because he's not an MP. And that would complicate the picture further for both the DA and the ANC. But again, that may just mean that you need fewer votes to be the biggest party, because I think that Action SA can eat into ANC support as well as DA support. But I don't necessarily think they get to the biggest party in Joburg. They become a real force, but but that remains to be seen. Let's see what the polling says. Let's see what the numbers say, and we'll revise as we go along. We don't know who the EFF's candidate is. MK just hasn't got out of the starting blocks really with its campaign yet. So we've seen early moves from the ANC, which shot itself in the foot, basically already conceding that the DA governs better, no matter what the ANC tries to spin. We know that's what the president said. And the DA has moved. So we're in election season, people. Now, some people might say, yeah, but how can you say this about the DA? People won't vote for the DA because they've already led Joburg and it didn't get much better. There are two responses to that. I don't think the average voter looks at Joburg and says the state Joburg is in is the DA's fault. Sure, they may not have been brilliant in governance, but when the DA led under Mashaba and even Paul Palatse, Joburg was in a better state than it is now. There's no doubt about that. However, let's assume Joburg was in a crisis then. The ANC has governed Joburg for 25 years out of the last 30. And either through ANC majority-led coalitions or being in the mayor position. Other parties have only governed in the intervening period. So do we blame the party that's been governing for 25 years, or do we blame parties that have been in and out of coalitions in the period between that? The problem is Joburg's crisis is a crisis of ANC governance, which isn't just about the immediate crisis, which has gotten worse and is probably at the worst stage it's ever been, but it's about decades of ANC misgovernance, decades of financial mismanagement, decades of CBD decay. And yes, sometimes there were moments of hope and the inner city was being regenerated from time to time. But in the main, the ANC has let Joburg crumble in its hands. It had all this time to fix it. And so voters will be asking, what can you do in the next year or the next 5 years that you couldn't do over the last 25 years that you had power in your hands? So look, to conclude, I just want to make this clear. I'm not extolling the virtues of Helen Zille as a human being. I have written countless words on her comments about colonialism, her position on Gaza, her views on BEE, which I think turn voters off. And if the DA changed those positions, I think they'd get even more votes. But it's fair to say I fundamentally disagree with Zille on those points. But unfortunately, in 2025, I think the residents of Joburg aren't going to be voting on geopolitical issues. They're not even going to necessarily be voting on national policy. They're going to be voting to make sure they get water and make sure they get electricity. And they might even hold their noses and say, you know what, we'll see these problems later down the line. Right now, I need to vote for the candidate who I think is going to be better at governing than the ANC. And I think that's certainly going to play into the favor of all opposition parties. But because the DA is the party that is the only other party that has governed big metros, they are, I think, going to do well for all the reasons I've said up to now. So I think Helen Zille's decision to run for mayor is going to be a game changer. And I think come results day, of course, there's many a slip twixt cup and lip, and many things could happen in the intervening period, and all the usual caveats apply. But all things being equal, I think on results day, one of the biggest earthquakes that is going to hit the ANC and South African politics is the DA in Joburg. And I think they will certainly at least be in the running, as they already are, to be the biggest party in Joburg. Now, I'll make future videos about what that could mean for the coalition dynamics, because the ANC could still rescue itself by partnering together. It'll be interesting to see which way Action SA goes in the coalitions, but that's all for after the election. I'm saying when people go into the voting booth, when we get the results, the DA is going to have a very good day in Joburg. Like, share, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down below. What do you think of this move? And where do you think things are heading in Joburg? We are in election season, people, and we'll be bringing you more and more election content and analysis. There should be more polls coming out soon, so we'll have a look at those. Make sure you take us to 400,000 subscribers and keep it locked on the biggest political YouTube channel and podcast in South Africa, SMWX. I hear you.